Good Thursday morning to you. I'm having some technical difficulties with the camera on my computer, so I'm trying to record this a little differently. Today I want to talk about King Hezekiah because as we've been walking through the narrative, the last several days we've been focusing more on the prophets than on the historical characters. I want to return back to the narrative and characters because King Hezekiah has a detail that I think is really important for our Can You Relate series. King Hezekiah is about 25 when he becomes king. He serves for 29 years, almost 3 decades. Now, what's interesting about King Hezekiah's reign is even though it's pretty long comparatively to the other kings, this is after the Syrian army has come and conquered. So there's just a remnant left of the people. King Hezekiah, as he reigns, he calls people from the outskirts of Jerusalem. He calls those who remained and were able to go into hiding when the Assyrian army came through, and he calls them into Jerusalem. He calls them into a protection of the city. Now, King Hezekiah, unlike Ahaz, his father and the predecessor kings, he is faithful to the Lord. He cleanses the temple. He reorganized the priests and the Levites. He prays to the Lord Almighty. So he's restoring back that Davidic tradition. He's restoring back everything that God had desired. And even in the remnants of what is left after this Assyrian conquering, King Hezekiah is able to do something extraordinary. He actually creates these tunnels underneath the city of Jerusalem, and it goes to a pool. It's called the Pool of Siloam. If you go to Israel still today, the pools of Siloam exist there. They, throughout the narrative from King Hezekiah on, they will be used for different purposes. King Hezekiah has the ability to draw springs and collect water. So those who have been cut off from water, which is often a war technique to get the people who are being conquered to surrender, they cut off water, they cut off food, they make them desperate. King Hezekiah is able to restore the water supply to Jerusalem through these underground tunnels and the pools of Siloam. And this is a beautiful way in which God is working through adversity, working through the remnants of faith. I think that as we think about that Can You Relate theme in this, often we see God more profoundly in our struggles than we do in our celebrations. That's kind of a sad reality to how we view faith, how we see God at work. The reality is God's always at work, but when our eyes are desperate, when we have those moments of desperation, deprivation, and we seek the Lord, we see more profound responses of God. And that's certainly true in the story of King Hezekiah. Now, as he's a faithful leader. About 15 years into his service, he becomes gravely ill. And we are in 2 Kings chapter 20. He becomes on his deathbed. The prophet Isaiah comes and says, you are going to die, and he asks for mercy. He turns away from the prophet, turns to the Lord, he asks for mercy. And the prophet Isaiah says, you will have 15 more years to your life. Now, Hezekiah, in that response, needs assurance. So Isaiah turns the sundial and says, you will have 15 more of your years of your life. He makes him this little concoction of pomegranates, and suddenly Hezekiah is restored to life. Now, what he does with the last 15 years is kind of interesting, because up until now, he's been incredibly faithful, and he remains faithful, but he also builds a certain amount of arrogance. The kings of Babylon send word, hoping that King Hezekiah is restored to good health. They send him gifts. And when King Hezekiah is restored to health, he invites the leaders of Babylon into the temple, into the palace. He shows them everything, everything grand about this. He kind of shows off a little bit. And Isaiah comes back and says, because you did this, the temple will fall to the Babylonians. They will crush the temple, which we know that happens, right? And in a couple hundred years, we're going to have this Babylonian exile and the crushing of the temple. Here's the thing about Hezekiah. He was amazingly faithful, especially compared to all his predecessors up until Solomon. He trusted in God. He even was able to do miraculous things because of God's power in his life. So through adversity, he was incredible. But in prosperity, his faith waned. I found this evangelical theologian from South Carolina who I think says it perfectly. He says, Hezekiah had passed the test of adversity, but he failed the test of prosperity. J.D. Greer is the guy who says this. As you think about this series, Can You Relate? And you think about the narrative of Hezekiah's life, what he was able to accomplish during very tough times, political unrest and strife and captivity and oppression and all that. He built this system, this aqueduct system that still exists today. The pools of Siloam are a beautiful example of how God has worked and restored Israel through the generations, through the centuries, through the millennia. But he was great in adversity. He failed a bit in prosperity. Can you relate? Can you relate to really coming to God when things are rough, but kind of forgetting about God when everything's going great? Can you relate to being on your knees and praying when there's a definite need, a healing, a restoration that needs maybe a reconciliation? But then in times of prosperity, being pretty excited about what you're able to accomplish. I think this is a challenge of all of us. This is definitely every person in faith, including myself. I think we all fall into this danger of we get complacent when things are great. We become complacent when life is easy and we think, well, we'll handle the little stuff, and God, I know you're there for the big stuff. But that's not the God of that's the God of our desires. That's not the God of God's desires. The God of God's desires wants to come to us no matter what, wants to be there, wants to be at work, and wants us to see that he's at work even when we haven't asked, even when we don't know exactly what we need. The God we have wants to be at work and showing us he's at work, even when our eyes are closed. Hezekiah had passed the test of adversity, but he failed the test of prosperity. Can you relate? Can you relate to that in your own life? What does that look like to see God in prosperity as much as adversity? Something to think about. Have a great Thursday.